Okay, so this is starting time. So Professor Jeremy Alexis from United States, first speaker. Of course, I just briefly look at his ideas. Slightly difficult. Slightly difficult. Why? He will share the story. Okay, decision making in service design, improving the speed and quality of our decision making for service design. So the topic is very specific. So please learn a lot, and then later part it's more interesting. But his talk, of course, I 100%, more than 100% make sure he will inspire you a lot. So, welcome, Jeremy Alexis.
Thank you so much. What an amazing conference you've set up. This is fantastic. Usually when I speak at conferences, I try to leave right after my own talk, but I'm going to stay for this whole one today because this is so fantastic. I'm going to discuss decision-making related to service design today because it pulls together two fields that I'm very, very interested in. One is decision science, which is where we look at how people and businesses and organizations make decisions and improve their decisions over time. The second, of course, is service design, which is where we think about the systems, the policies, the strategies for delivering intangible experiences to people that improve their lives, improve our businesses, and ultimately improve the communities in which they live. Now, the reason why these work so well together, in my perspective, is they can both learn a lot from each other. So service design can learn from decision science about the rigorous process management, right? Because if we're doing service design at a large organization, it's often a function of change management, meaning that we're changing the products and services that the business is offering, we're changing how the employees work, we're changing how the customers react to and engage with the offering, right? So it's a very, very large, complex process. And decision science teaches us a lot about how to deal with complex process changes like that. On the other side, decision science can learn from service design because so much of what makes a good decision is having really, really creative alternatives to pick from, right? So when you're making a decision, you could say, am I going to pick A? Am I going to pick B? Am I going to pick C? Right? Service design can help us create wonderful alternatives that can fit into those different categories. It also provides for us a very robust process of testing so that we can actually build and extract real data so that we're not making decisions under a high degree of uncertainty. So the first service that I want to talk about today related to service design is something called Borrow a Cup. And this comes from Starbucks. And Starbucks is radically transforming how they're going to deliver coffee in the next 5 to 10 years. If you're not familiar with this, it's essentially going to a reusable cup. So when you go to Starbucks, it will no longer be the paper cup, but it might be a plastic cup, it might be a ceramic cup. But it's a cup that you can take, you can drink your coffee or whatever beverage you have. Once you're done with it, you can return it to the store or another receptacle. It's then washed, and then you can reuse it. Now, this is just a wonderful example of service design because it's transforming how an organization works and delivers their product to their customer. But it also included a lot of community, and Starbucks calls the people who are the baristas, right, the people making the coffee, they call them partners. It included a lot of partner research as well to get their feedback. So in terms of decision making, it's a great example of an organization that had an initial set of values, the desire to transform and change how they deliver coffee to make it more sustainable, and then a process that included lots and lots of feedback from partners, from employees, and from communities. And a couple of things that they found while they were doing all of this testing as they were trying this in various environments was that, number one, people wanted choices about what type of cup they were going to use. And in fact, the initial prototypes were opaque cups. And they realized that so many of the drinks that Starbucks produces, people want to actually see the drink, right? So they were able to transform to a transparent cup. The other was that people wanted to bring their own cups. So what you see here is a result of some of the partner feedback they got during the testing, which is this idea that people might want to bring their own cup into Starbucks and then have a convenient place to sterilize and wash it so that they could then hand it to the partner to fill it with coffee. So this idea was actually developed during the testing. And then finally, they realized that in order for this to be successful, that you have to be able to drop a cup in places other than Starbucks. So they're starting to think about different places where you can drop your cup off. And at Arizona State University, in the state of Arizona in the US, they have a large pilot going on, which is focused on understanding where on campus people will want to drop their cups so they can be quickly recycled and brought back into the store to be used. Now, what's fascinating about this is it's a very great example of a fantastic decision process, because Starbucks first started with, what are our values, right? They had this very clear value of trying to become better for the environment without necessarily sacrificing the delight that their products bring to all of their customers every day, right? The second was then creating lots of alternatives, right? So it wasn't just one process, one service for reusable cups, but they developed and tested many of them, right? So they had many alternatives to pick from. And then the final piece, which is important to understand, is that their testing process was something we called progressive de-risking. So it started with some very, very quick sketches, nothing more than what we might do at design school, showing it to people and getting immediate feedback from partners and from potential customers, right? And then once Starbucks understood that there was some interest there, they then moved to a slightly more advanced prototype, and then more advanced and more advanced, so that the most uncertainty that they had within whether or not they should launch this was when they were using the roughest prototypes. And over time, their investment increased, and their uncertainty about the future of this product decreased. Now, I like to contrast this with, in many ways, with some of the early days of service design in the United States of America, with love it or hate it, McDonald's restaurants. So in, I'd say, the 60s and 70s, especially in the United States, McDonald's restaurants grew so quickly because of how fast the service was. And in order to deliver fast service, McDonald's would pre-cook all of their hamburgers and all of their French fries, so that when you arrived at McDonald's, you'd walk up to the counter and you'd say, "I'd like a Big Mac." And the person at the counter would then turn around, grab the Big Mac for you, grab the fries, put it in a bag, off you go. Now, this was very fast, but it traded off sort of quality. Because if you went there at like 2:30 in an afternoon, chances are your Big Mac would not be very tasty because it might be cold or rubbery. So McDonald's continued like this for many years, winning within the market because people prioritized speed over quality. But over time, their competitors then became able to deliver quality with maybe not as much speed, but certainly not that much less speed that it was perceptible. So they started to see their market share go down. So what McDonald's decided to do in the mid-90s was go to a concept called Made for You. And it forced them to redesign the kitchens of their restaurants. Now, to understand the scale of this is actually quite hard, right? Because there are tens of thousands of McDonald's restaurants around the world. It's a franchised-owned organization. And for them to redesign their kitchens and rebuild the kitchens was no small task, huge investment. But they were sure that we have to go to Made For You to compete with our competition who are delivering better quality burgers. So after a few years, tens and tens of millions of dollars, they put this new kitchen together. Now there was one problem. They never, ever tested this in a whole store format. So within their service design, they understood that they had improved the efficiency of the kitchen, right, so that you could order a custom burger and have it delivered. But they never paired that with the front of house service model. So what happened was you had a front of house, right, the counter where people were delivering the hamburgers for you, that was designed for the old version of McDonald's where everything was already ready in the back. And then you had this kitchen which was producing Made For You, which took a lot longer. So you ended up with these very, very difficult experiences of people getting in line, waiting for their hamburger, and then having to stand at the counter because that's where it was supposed to be delivered. But it would take so long for the food to actually be delivered that people would just stand there for a few minutes. And there are pictures, it was especially bad in countries like Russia, where there were huge, huge lines of people standing outside of the doors because they couldn't get to their food because it was taking so long to get to them. So this is an example of poor decision making, right? Because they made this decision to go to tens and tens of millions of dollars to deliver this new kitchen. Starbucks is not following that same path, right? All of their service design now is very much about coupling the front of house experience of, as a customer, when I walk in, what's my experience of getting this new cup of coffee, with making sure that they have the back end experience well planned as well. Another great example of decision making in service design comes from the continued and I think constant desire to link our physical retail locations with our online ordering and our digital back end. So many stores these days are thinking about how do we start to create a closer connection between those two places. And what often happens is you'll have executives or leaders think, what we need to do is have something in our aisles where people who are shopping for something can see a kiosk or an iPad. And in this example, if it doesn't have the shampoo that I wanted, right? If I went to a convenience store to buy some shampoo and that shampoo is not available, I'd love to be able to scroll on a kiosk and then order the shampoo and have it delivered, right? Now, that sounds great, right? You sketch it out. I'm sure that, there's probably a storyboarding class here. We could do a neat storyboard of how it would work. But there's a huge problem that you don't understand until you test this in the field in real time, which is that most people who are going to a store, in this case to buy shampoo, are going there under duress, right? If I had planned ahead, I could buy my fancy shampoo online and have it shipped to my house 3 days later, that's fine. But in this case, I'm going to the store that day because I need shampoo right now. And if I see a kiosk ordering, that's not helping me because I need shampoo immediately. Now, obviously, this does not apply to me personally, as you can tell, but for people with hair, it is kind of a big deal. So when we think about decision-making in service design, so much about making quality decisions is how do we prototype? How do we test this in the field? So as we saw with the Starbucks example, so much of their decision-making came from doing very early rough prototypes in the field and getting lots of feedback. Luckily, in this case, the retailer was able to test it quickly and determine that there was very little increase in terms of sales because people wanted shampoo that day if they were at their store. I actually wanted to sort of reflect back, though, right? Because the examples that I've given have all been about service design and sort of prototype testing. And I think from my experience, where we began to teach this initially was really around 2012 at the Institute of Design. And we were working with the Hyatt Hotels Corporation at the time. And Hyatt was in this mode of significant innovation. They were aware that the hotel industry is what they called the sea of sameness, meaning that when you went to a hotel, it was sometimes hard to tell if you were in a Marriott, if you were in a Hilton, if you were in a Hyatt. They all seem very similar. So to address this, they launched this massive program of prototyping and testing of new services. And these new services were everything from personalized delivery to your door and your room to different ways to to help the staff who are cleaning rooms. So it was a pretty significant effort. But one of the challenges Hyatt saw very early on as they looked into this new approach to service design was that they had no way to manage it because there were so many ideas happening. And so that's where I think some of the initial thought about how do we merge decision science and prototyping together really occurred. And this is actually a picture up here of the Grand Hyatt here in Hong Kong, which is one of our initial prototype sites. We really started to think about how do we build into this a more disciplined process to make sure that we're actually using a series of qualitative and quantitative methods to determine if we want to move something forward. So as an example of this, one of my favorite stories from this Hyatt prototyping experiment was we were thinking of ways to make it easier. Like last night, I got to my hotel quite late. Once again, maybe I needed shampoo, which is, again, kind of a joke. But if you needed that late at night, what would you do, right? Would you call down and have someone bring it up to your room? It's quite late. So we thought what we could do is get sort of a shelving unit, have it in the lobby area, and stock it with all of the different like little shampoos, hand lotion, maybe even hair dryers that people could borrow, so that it was the self-serve area, right? Very quick prototype. And we actually prototyped this at the Hyatt Regency in O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And within minutes, our team had set this prototype up. We were so excited about it. Within minutes of us, sort of backing away and opening it up, because it was an airport hotel, we saw a pilot come up to the to the area, look at it, and he just opened up his bag and just dumped everything into it. And at that point, we said, you know what? We don't think this prototype's going to work. So decision was made right there. And then this is work that my students are currently doing with United Airlines. So here are some students in the field doing work at one of our airports. There's one of the students groups who had just come back from a prototype test about improving efficiency with finding lost bags. And this last part is a living lab, right, which is existing now in United Airlines sort of innovation headquarters, where it allows different employees to come in and give feedback to and try new things within some of the disciplines that United is working on. So I think this is kind of a great example of where service design is going, to this very community, based approach of many different parts of the organization working together to try out and test new services, and then having a disciplined process to ensure that you're capturing, calculating, and continuing the rigorous process of making sure that you're capturing data on all of this. Financial services is another area where a significant amount of service design is going on. These are not actually, this is student work. I can't show the actual financial services work that we're doing. But so much is happening related to AI and financial services, especially as you start to plan your retirement. Right? So how do I actually save enough money so that I can retire? And where service design works here is that it's moving from being just sort of banking on your phone to building all the wraparound services for that. I'm not going to go into that. All right. Because I know we're running a little late here, I don't want to go through too much of this, because we're already over time, aren't we? We're okay, okay. I just wanted to go through sort of the 9 tools of decision making. The first that we love to talk about is this idea of decision triage. So when you're doing service design, when you're creating new services for an organization, it's helpful to think about 3 levels of decision making within those services. Some of them we might consider casual, right? So these are everyday decisions about the service that, with a general good mission statement and a good set of criteria, you can just go ahead and make them. There's a second level, which is the conscious decision. This is usually something that's on a grid or a framework, right, that allows you to have a checklist of, if we're going to do this type of service, these are the types of things that we should have involved. So many design systems that we see today really kind of fit into this. But where my work mostly focuses on the rigorous side, right, when we have to make a big strategic decision, for example, Starbucks, are we going to launch Borrow a Cup? If we're going to do that, what type of process do we have to put in place to make that happen? So it's helpful to make sure that you're organizing your decisions using this framework. We also talk a lot about how to create the right team structure, right? So within service design, it's helpful to have a decision board, right? This is the executive leadership that's making the ultimate decision. There's a decision team that's actually preparing, right, the data, the options, and delivering it to the decision team. And then finally, there are implementers. These are the people who are responsible for actually implementing the decision itself, right? So in the Starbucks example we talked about, the decision board was essentially, right, the executive leadership of the organization. The decision team was actually the design team, right? These were the service designers who were responsible for producing the alternatives and conducting the research, right, and making sure that they had all the information available. But then the implementers, right, this was the baristas of the partners. They were involved throughout the whole process to ensure that whatever was put into place was actually going to work operationally from the organization. One of the biggest problems with decision making in service design is we don't know we're making decisions. So it's always helpful to have a decision statement, right, just being very upfront. Like, what are the decisions that we're making? I want to be very clear, prior art is a big example. So if you're familiar with intellectual property law, when you write a patent, you'll often see the concept of prior art. That's all the other inventions that patent was based on. When you go into a big company, right, they've already done so much work already, right? They're, within a company, they've had that idea 5 or 6 times already. It's really helpful when you're making a decision to be very clear what previous work your decision is being based on. Now, of course, teamwork is part of decision making. So we found it's very important to have a social contract, right? And when you write a social contract for your team, it should have the rules, the values, and the constraints. Again, this is a big part of how Starbucks works, making sure that their teams follow this, so they have a way to interact with each other and a set of rules to follow as they move forward. Within service design, we're always concerned about metrics. And right now, my general opinion is for best practice related to metrics is something we call OKRs. If you are not familiar with OKRs, it stands for objectives and key results. And the objective is kind of what we want to do, and then the key results are how we're going to measure it. This seems pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised at how much service design goes on without a good sense of here's our objective, here's the key results that we're trying to hit. And then you can build a dashboard, right? For those of you going into consulting, this is what your dashboards look like. Finally, last 2, when we're building great service designs. This is an idea generation method that we use to create alternatives. One of the things when you're developing a service, it is more complex in so many ways than a single product. So you need a brainstorming and idea generation technique that is aligned with the level of complexity that you're actually going to be producing. So we've invented tools that help you sort of build alternatives that are complex enough to sort of address all of the challenges that you'll often see in a service design challenge. You want to consider risk and reward, right? One of my sort of pet peeves about design, especially design thinking, is dot voting, right? When you put dots on the idea that you think is the best. In decision science, they will tell you you'd be better off throwing darts at a board than using dots because there's so much bias that goes into how you vote. So one of the great things about decision science is they say the first thing you want to do is score your concepts, right? We're probably all familiar with this, with design principles or criteria, scoring the concepts against it. But the second thing is they ask you to consider sort of the risks of your solutions, right? So you're seeing how well they score against your criteria, but then you're also evaluating your ideas based on the risks that they can produce. I talked about this earlier with Starbucks. This is progressive de-risking, right? As our uncertainty reduces, our investment increases. So you go from very early sketches to more detailed prototypes later on. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is where I'll end, is that in service design, it's really helpful to bring into this idea managing a portfolio. And a portfolio, of course, you think about uncertainty, right, which is risk, and you think about reward. So if you think about your investment portfolio, you have some investments that are more risky with maybe a greater reward, and some investments that are less risky but have sort of a lower reward associated with them. And within a service design context, it's helpful to always think about what does our balance look like? Are we actually delivering portfolios that are aligned with our strategy? So that's kind of the last best practice. Now, I'm more than happy to share all these slides. I know that my slides tend to be docutations. There's a lot of text on them. So you can contact the event organizers. I'm more than happy to share all of the slides with you. So I'll just leave you with this. I think the question about where is service design going next and design thinking, all the interesting articles we've seen. One of the things that I'm working on right now is actually what I would consider service design. And in the city of Chicago, right, we have a very, very large public school system. And one of the challenges with the public school system is the funding's not always great. And unfortunately, we're starting to see so many of the high-performing students in our public school system not have advanced math options, right? They just don't have all the great advanced math options that they once had. So we're working with Chicago Public Schools, my university. We're working with Chicago Public Schools and our city colleges, which is our community college, to develop a pathway that connects sort of high school students all the way through to college. So you start in your third year of high school, and you move all the way through college and get a master's degree. And it's an ecosystem because it's not just us, there are other universities participating. So when I think about service design, to me this is probably one of the more rewarding things that I'll ever do with service design, which is to think about what's the experience of that first generation college student actually learning math in a way that's helpful for them and going all the way through to get a master's degree. And we're using the same exact principles, the same exact tools that we use with Starbucks to do the Borrow a Cup to help these students go from their third year of high school to a master's degree. So thank you so much. I'll be around the rest of the day. This was fun. Sorry I went a little bit over, but thank you.